Well, time now for the press view. Dipti Galorn joining us on the set. Hello to you, Dipti.
I will.
Beginning with this top story, of course, the Ukraine war, and starting with the British dailies, focusing on one story, though, sanctions against Russian oligarchs.
Well, the British government has been under pressure to slap these sanctions on Russian oligarchs and really be seen as further punishing the allies of Vladimir Putin. It's announced now that it will freeze the assets and impose travel bans on 7 Russian oligarchs, including Chelsea Football Club owner Roman Abramovich, who's already actually put his club up for sale. He's really the focus of the British dailies today. It's the fall of the Roman Empire. The local paper Metro says in pretty inspired headline, I must say, on its front page. The British government accuses Abramovich of receiving preferential treatment and concessions from the Kremlin. Abramovich's club, Chelsea's, also bearing the brunt of those sanctions with a ban on player purchasing, ticket sales, and merchandising. Metro saying on its front page he has blood on his hands. The Russian oligarch is specifically accused of being involved in, quote, destabilizing Ukraine. His steel manufacturing and mining company provided steel to the Russian military to build tanks that the Daily Mirror says could be killing Ukrainian kids. The paper calls the pair, quote, blood brothers on its front page.
Meanwhile, a lot of papers also focusing on the sort of information war, as it were, specifically fake news. Tell us a bit more.
Well, the strategy of controlling the narrative, along with, things like criminalizing anti-war protests, is crucial to Vladimir Putin in maintaining support for the war in Ukraine amongst Russians. It's the focus of this very interesting article from the New York Times today, which looks at how the Kremlin's narrative about Ukraine is, quote, ruthlessly edited, audaciously manipulated, and almost diametrically opposed to the actual truth. Why would Russians pressure Putin to end the war when it's made out to be a limited operation blown widely out of proportion by a Russian-hating West? That's the narrative that's being given to them. The proof of this has been seen in Ukrainian families torn apart because family members in Russia they do believe the war is justified, or they simply don't believe the realities that we're seeing on the ground there.
And there are mixed opinions about whether the Russian propaganda machine is actually working or faltering.
Well, it would appear to be faltering, at least according to this article from the Telegraph. Well, it describes extraordinary scenes on Russian state television of guests condemning the war in Ukraine. Vladimir Soloviev, he's a primetime talk show host on the state-owned Russia One network. He had to actually interrupt his guests who couldn't stop criticizing the war recently. One filmmaker was saying that he has a hard time imagining Russia taking control of cities like Kyiv, and even warned that allies like China and India could distance themselves if the humanitarian disaster unfolded. Another guest asked, quote, do we need to get into another Afghanistan, but one that could be worse? This visibly a reference to Russia's invasion, the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, which ended in humiliation a decade later. So these scenes were all the more extraordinary given that Putin has passed laws criminalizing criticism of the Russian military forces.
And another British paper, The Independent, speaking to a Russian protester who condemns the war.
Well, I think it's important to get that voice out. We don't hear a lot of it, enough of it. This woman, Olga, she's actually hidden her real identity, and she tells The Independent that about 70% of people in her circle of acquaintances are completely convinced by Russia's line that Ukraine is bombing its own citizens and that Russia is conducting a justified special operation there. She says she's participated in 3 anti-war protests, but since those laws criminalizing anti-war protests, she's just simply too scared to go out now. She spoke to The Independent over the app Signal to prevent her communications from being traced. In this interview, she expresses her admiration for Zelensky and for Vladimir Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, and Ukrainian fighters, adding, I quote, for many years to come, we will have to apologize and ask forgiveness of Ukrainians.
Yeah, and those anti-war protests we saw in more than 40 cities across Russia, thousands of people being arrested. Finally, from you, Dipti, there's a poignant article from the New York Times looking at American Ukrainians who have returned home to fight in the war.
Well, they come from all walks of life, but they share a nationality in common, and now they're all heeding Zelensky's call to take up arms. Like Anna Bogdanova, a 37-year-old data scientist trading Manhattan coffee shops for weapons in her hometown in Ukraine. The New York Times also talks to Yuri Blazkowicz. He's a 63-year-old taxi driver who moved to the U.S. after the collapse collapse of the Soviet Union. He spent $3,000 buying military gear. He says he's planning to fly to Warsaw and then cross the land border, offering his services, he says, to drive a truck or why not, to use a weapon. But let's end on this front page from the Daily Telegraph. This picture, at least for me, was quite poignant, Will. It could have been a picture from 7 decades ago, but it's not. It's 2022. A Ukrainian serviceman there hugging his girlfriend goodbye at a railway station in the western city of Lviv.
Yeah, and sadly, seems like that not that uncommon. All right, thank you very much, Deputy Laurent, with a look at what's making papers. Time now for a quick break, and then more headlines here on France 24.